How do you even begin to tell the story of a whole country? Well, sometimes the best way to understand the huge sweep of history, all the wars, the big social shifts, is to look through a much, much smaller window, the story of just one ordinary family. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to dive into the story of the Stephens family. Now, on the surface, they're just normal people, but their lives play out against the backdrop of one of the most incredible and turbulent centuries in British history. So, to frame this, just look at these two dates. Our story kicks off way back in 1869, deep in the Victorian era, with the birth of a grandfather, Frederick Stephens. And it stretches all the way to 1992, with the death of his grandson, Bertram. I mean, think about that. One single family's timeline, from the age of steam, right up to the dawn of the digital age. It's incredible.
And it's that grandson, Bertram Stephens, who's really going to be our anchor here. By looking at his life, we can see the powerful currents of the 20th century and how they pulled and shaped not just his family, but the entire country.
Okay, so who was Bertram? Well, he was born in 1922 in Plymouth, a huge naval city. And right away, his life was marked by these major personal events. I mean, a huge loss early on, his father dying when he was only 14. Then, a wartime marriage in 1944, which is what actually takes him from the south of England all the way up north to Liverpool. And he eventually passes away in Birkenhead in 92. So this timeline, it's more than just a list of dates, It's a map. It shows a physical journey right across England, this migration from the traditional naval south to the industrial north. And that journey tells a much, much bigger story.
But before we follow that map, we really need to understand the world Bertram was born into. It was a world that was frankly forged by hardship and this recurring, tragic pattern of loss for the men in his family. 40. That's it. That was the age of Bertram's father, Frederick George Stephens, when he died, all of a sudden in 1936.
And Bertram, he was just 14. I mean, can you even imagine that? Losing your dad at that age. It would have completely changed his entire view of the world. It must have forced this huge sense of responsibility on him, way too young. And the thing is, this wasn't some isolated tragedy. His own grandfather, Frederick, had also died young, way back in 1907. So you see this pattern emerging. For the Stephens family, resilience wasn't just, a nice quality to have. It was a survival tool. It was practically an inherited trait passed down through generations of having to deal with the worst. But the family's trials weren't just personal. Oh no, they were caught right in the middle of the biggest global conflicts of the century. And we can see that so clearly in the incredible story of Bertram's uncle, Reginald Stephens, and his trial by fire in the Royal Navy during World War I. Okay, so this is Devonport, and these are the Royal Navy barracks they called Vivid 2. This is the exact spot where Reginald's brutal naval career kicked off. But his experience wasn't going to be on the glorious open deck of some warship. No, it started right here on the training ground for the unsung heroes down in the engine rooms.
So what did it even mean to be a stoker back then? Well, it was absolutely brutal. We're talking hours and hours of shoveling coal into these giant, hungry furnaces in just searing heat. Their lungs, their skin, everything was just caked in what one source called indescribable clouds of dust. And then there was the constant, terrifying risk. If your ship got hit by a torpedo, the boiler room basically became an instant D-trap. These guys were the hidden, sweating backbone of the entire Navy.
And then you see a document like this. Wow, this makes it so real. This is Reginald's actual service record. This isn't a story somebody told. This is a primary source. I mean, just look at the handwriting, the lists of ships he was on, the dates. This is his life, his service, written down in ink. It's a direct line back to the heat and the noise of those engine rooms.
And buried right there in that record is this quiet little story of professional grit. See, the Navy had this rating system for ability. Mod for moderate, sat for satisfactory, and super for superior. And if you follow Reginald's record, you can see he worked his way all the way up to superior. So in the toughest conditions you can possibly imagine, he didn't just survive, he actually excelled.
But history isn't just about men in war, right? What about the women? Their stories are often quieter, they're harder to find in the archives, but they're just as important. So let's turn to Bertram's aunt, Winifred Alice Stephens.
Sometimes a whole life is just hinted at in a single line on a dusty old document, and that's what we have here.
In the 1921 census, we find an 18-year-old Winifred, and her occupation? A barmaid at the Seymour Hotel. I mean, that one little entry gives us this precious glimpse into the life of a young, working-class woman trying to make her own way in post-war England, a time when new opportunities were finally starting to open up for women outside the home.
Now, Winifred tragically died really young, at just 23. Her life was short, but her story is so powerful because it represents so many others whose contributions are often totally overlooked. You know, the women who had to navigate family loss, who went out and sought economic independence, and who left their own quiet legacies. These are the threads that really make up the social fabric of a community.
So, we've got early loss, the crucible of war, the quiet resilience of women. How do all these different threads tie together? Well, they all lead right back to Bertram. They all shaped the man he became and the life he ended up leading.
So let's trace that whole journey one last time. It starts with these really deep roots in Devon, in that traditional naval culture. Then the Great Wars come along and act as this crucible, a force that scars the family, for sure, but also opens up new paths. And all that upheaval leads to a huge northward shift, a classic story of post-war social mobility as Bertram moves to Merseyside. He ends his life in Birkenhead, starting a brand new family chapter in one of Britain's great industrial centers.
And that's really the heart of it. Bertram's personal story becomes the story of his nation, his journey from a southern naval city that was totally defined by the First War to a northern industrial suburb that was basically built in the boom after the Second. Well, that perfectly captures the massive social and economic shifts of 20th century Britain.
And this is the real power of looking at history this way, through a personal lens. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What huge historical forces of war, of migration, of industrial change, of loss are hiding in plain sight, right inside your own family's story? Because the quiet stories, just like the story of the Stephens family, often have the most to say.